When it comes to solutions specifically from third parties, there are a lot of aspects that we have to be aware of and be secure with regards to information security. First and foremost is our policies, and second and foremost is the contract side. So ensuring that there's obviously an NDA signed, but beyond that, there's additional controls that we need to do as a customer from our end to ensure that our third parties are adhering to not only our policies and procedures, but we have also the necessary controls to make sure that they're doing their job and doing what they're supposed to be doing for their customer in a secure fashion as well. There are aspects when it comes to authentication, for instance, where a lot of companies fail to ensure that there's adequate MFAs, multi-factor authentication is applied, for instance. Especially when it comes to the data and the data sovereignty and residency of accessing the customer's information and their data. So to what aspect and what degree do they have access to your data is something that the business and the CISO's job needs to make the business aware of as well. To what extent and to what degree. We have to hit the due diligence and hit the ground running with it as well. Prior even to that, we need to have the controls ready as well. We can't just adopt a new vendor without having the necessary controls there in place. For instance, when it comes to the access environment, the environment itself that they will be accessing needs to be secured in a different way, more so than it would be for a typical staff member as well. This is besides the aspects of insider threat, which we can talk about in a few minutes. But when it comes to actually providing the right environment, the access rights, down to authentication, down to a very, very limited, basically at least privileged point of view for a vendor just to do their job, just enough access to do their job, more or less. It's beyond that actually as well. There are several KPIs that I have to adhere to and is expected from me. It is ensuring that there's enough reporting done. So what companies fail to do, they worry more so about false positives, attending security awareness. That's not enough nowadays. What we need to do is empower, what my job is right now is to empower the users that are in the organization, primarily our staff members, those that have access to our environment, to report the number of instances that they see in different ways. So through gamification is one of the things that we've been implementing as well, increasing the level of reporting directly coming from our staff members. So not just through information security, but down to even physical security. These little reports here and there, even now when people are starting to come back to the organization and sort of having more of a hybridized model when it comes to working in our organization, there are still aspects of physical security that still needs to be followed through, for instance. So these are one of the key KPIs that we do. This is exactly what you just said right there. It's just assessing the pros and cons most importantly, but as long as you have a solid, not only contract, but as long as your SLAs are there and they're exactly what you want them to be, and they basically adhere to your security controls and you provide them the right environment, I could see a good partnership there, right there. It just depends on what are your expectations and what is the limits beyond these, what is in scope and what is out of scope of these expectations. So as long as there's adequate controls there, I don't see why there shouldn't be, I wouldn't avoid any MSSP agreements with. This is something that's really important and the business always needs to understand. There's no such thing as 100% security. There's always going to be an element of breach. But the business needs to orchestrate, and the CISO's job needs to orchestrate and take all these business opportunities and turn them into not just risks, but identifiable risks for the organization, and come up with safeguards, insurance, either cybersecurity insurance aspects of a contract, delve into the level of items and assets that there's going to be access or is going to have an element of risk, and determine what is the right safeguards, what is the right controls required to mitigate them to an acceptable level. Now here's where people fail to think that, okay, once we have a firewall set up, once we have a certain control there, we're all set and good. No, there's always going to be OEM risks. There's always going to be a manufacturer risk that's going to be out there, that's going to be found out by a third party, that is not going to be discussed or exposed in the news for the next couple of months, but it's already happening in the background. What we need to do as a business is be made aware of this and and apply those risks and take those aspects and analyze them accordingly and develop certain safeguards to protect ourselves to an acceptable level. Because there's no such thing as 100% We have intellectual property that we've applied certain safeguards to. We have certain access environments, R&D, that is quite critical to our infrastructure and quite critical to our bottom line, more or less. And we have applied the necessary controls. Threefold actually. First and foremost, security training. We've developed certain security trainings even for those who have privileged access. So certain examples would be system admins, people are behind your and monitoring and managing your servers and so forth. and limiting the access rights, having solutions such as PAM, single sign-on. These are the certain controls that help complement that. But more importantly, when it comes to, let's say, and the potentials where people fail to understand, insider threats happen on a day-to-day basis, and they happen during the peak period of either offboarding and onboarding new resources as well. So the company needs to set certain privileges and profiles for the right access for the right individuals all the time, and they need to categorize them. And us, alongside the businesses themselves, the respective departments and the asset owners, we need to suggest and say, okay, this is a high-risk individual, this is a high-risk individual, and there's where we come in, do an additional profiling, do a thorough risk assessment and based on our risk assessment methodology, and then only then do we apply the necessary safeguards and additional controls. So, for instance, if a system admin is being offboarded, there needs to be already monitoring, like heavy monitoring on their access and what they're doing on a day-to-day basis, having tools such as DLP on board to prevent any inadvertent leakages made by a potential insider. So there are various ways to solve this. It's very difficult. It is a learning curve. It is a major learning curve. It's not just with your tools for the trades, such as EDR, for instance, to determine what is normal behavior, not just on the user's level, but also on your network level. What's the normal heuristics that is determined, so you can take the right analytics and have a variable gauge of assurance that this is normal behavior versus what isn't normal behavior. It's tried and tested, and you're required to do this on a day-to-day basis, or at least once a year, thoroughly. So it's quite a challenge. It takes a lot of time.
Obviously, you don't want too many false alerts, so you need to
naturally.
keep the tolerance open, but too much, as you said, is
exactly. But I welcome false alerts or false positives because they help determine what are the false negatives to the true events as well. So it's a matter of effective research and ongoing research that needs to be done. For me, ever since getting to this field, at least now a decade into this field, I always try to learn. Most importantly, from my peers, I keep an open mind. I would never put down. For instance, if there's a new tool out there, or if there's a new, let's say, certification, or if there's a new product out there in the mind, I always try to keep an open mind and try to explore it as best as I can. So keeping an open mind, and most importantly, when it comes to being a CISO, one of the key things that I learned is the invaluable and irredeemably valuable, you wouldn't succeed without it, is listening to your key respective stakeholders, specifically your departments, from finance, HR. You need to listen to them, and you need to understand what they value as this is their crown jewels from a departmental perspective, so you can provide them with adequate controls. But what CISOs fail to do as well, from what I've seen day in, day out, is what this individual would consider his crown jewels would not have necessarily controls that would mimic your remaining peers. You would need to tailor-make them. So, for instance, if HR values the encryption of their payroll, it might not be the case for checks and balances for your finance departments, for instance. They may need additional controls, but not encryption. You need to go as in-depth as possible and try to make it as understandable as possible as well. Because these individuals would not know what is encryption, they would not know what these technologies do and what is the outcome. So there will need to be a lot of dialogue, a lot of ongoing dialogue. You need to maintain these relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. How do you feel about
with respect to our nationals, this is a good example I'm bringing up. With respect to our nationals, we have an ADP program, and we have a good sized number of UAE nationals who are constantly looking out for new technologies out there for us. And to be honest, if it wasn't for them and their spearheading these initiatives and taking the challenge of doing these POCs with these new technologies out there, from advanced SIMs to EDRs and so forth, this is quite important. So honestly, I welcome this format actually as well.